What is up, everybody? Purple and Gold podcast for Monday, June 1st. We have flipped the calendar to June. College baseball NCAA tournament is in full swing. I've got some thoughts on that. I want to get to some LSU baseball news, some players who have entered the transfer portal, and I want to talk about the big football recruiting weekend, which included Coach O being all over our social media timelines this weekend and how much fun I think that is and how much benefit I think that can be for LSU. Let's start with the baseball news. A handful of players have announced they are entering the transfer portal. We already knew about Maverick Rizzi, the sophomore pitcher, Daniel Harden, the junior college outfielder, Trent Caraway, the transfer third baseman from Oregon State, will go back in the portal, and Jaden Newt, the 3-year pitcher, will also go in the portal. Jaden Newt is playing with Chris Stanfield in the MLB Draft League. I assume it's his intention to try to get drafted and signed. And I think had Trent Caraway had any sort of a decent year, I think it was his hope to be drafted as well. I don't think he will be drafted now, but certainly he could be a guy who could be drafted late and could sign. What does any of this mean for LSU's team next year? Not much. None of these guys were expected to be back. None of these guys were expected to be a big part of the group next year. I think these first four names are just the beginning of, many, upwards of 15 or more, who could go in the transfer portal. And then you'll have the Curiels and the Milums and the Jake Browns who you will lose to the draft. It is sort of my understanding that LSU has a handful of pitchers. Cooper Moore, William Schmidt, Kason Evans, Marcos Paz, Reagan Ricken, that I think they would intend to bring back. And then I think obviously Aaron Beatty, Omar Cerna, Mason Braun, William Patrick, Jack Ruckert, maybe among a few others, would be the handful of players that they would like to keep on offense. There have been a lot of big names. The transfer portal officially opened today. There have been a lot of big names that are in the portal. I'm not going to go into any of those names yet because, quite frankly, I don't know what LSU's interest is or what those players' interests are in LSU, but there's a handful of players from Gonzaga, there's players from Cal Baptist, there's a handful of players from a lot of these small schools who are conference freshmen of the year, conference players of the year. I believe there's a shortstop from William and Mary that LSU might be interested in. So I certainly don't think there'll be any shortage of players that LSU and Arkansas and all of these other schools who are out now, and some that are still playing, obviously, will compete for in the transfer portal. So we will keep you up to date on all of that as we go into the portal cycle and as it really develops. Before I get to the big LSU football recruiting weekend, let me talk a little bit about the baseball tournament. For anybody who watched any of it over the weekend, it was amazing. Little Rock, St. John's, they've advanced as 4 seeds. You just had carnage all over. UCLA did not even get out of their regional. Cal Poly won that regional. You've got a handful of Game 7s today, including number 2 national seed Georgia Tech on the ropes against Oklahoma. West Virginia trying to potentially host Cal Poly if they can beat Kentucky today. Florida's got to fight off Troy. Auburn has come through the losers bracket. They've got to beat Milwaukee. Milwaukee trying to be another 4 seed to get in. You've got a handful of super regional matchups that are already set. Oregon and Texas will meet in Austin. Mississippi State and Georgia will meet in Athens. That'll be a whale of an all SEC super regional. And one of the things I wanted to bring up was that when Oregon State lost to Oregon last night and they were eliminated, that meant that all 8 of the teams who played in Omaha last year, none of them advanced past the regional round the following year. And, a handful, LSU, Murray, Arizona, some others were not even in the tournament, and then the rest lost in the regional round. Why do I think this happened, and is this a sign that it's going to be harder and harder to sustain success year over year if you're LSU? Well, why do I think this happened? I think it happened because you had a couple of teams who were down, like LSU, like Arizona. You had a couple of teams like Murray State who were Cinderellas last year. And then you just had the unusual deal of UCLA getting knocked out when nobody really saw that coming. Do I think it's a sign that LSU's an every other year success, or that you can't keep going to regionals and super regionals and the College World Series every year? I don't. I just think the way it broke for Jay and for LSU these last couple of times, they lost a lot off of both of the teams that won, like a lot. And they had to replace too much in one fell swoop. And then if you look at that 24 team, that 24 team was an out away from beating North Carolina in extra innings with Gage Jump on the mound, who's now in Major League Baseball. LSU wins that game. If they just get one more out and hold on, they're going to come home and play West Virginia in a super regional, and they're more than likely going to make it to Omaha. Now, how does that change things in 2025? I don't know, because when they were eliminated in the regional round in 24, obviously it enabled them to get in the transfer portal earlier for the 25 season, and that's how you end up with Anthony Ianson, among others. So I don't think that it's an inconsistency issue for LSU or for any school. And I really think the more we start to do the autopsy on this 2026 team, I think we just are finding out that everything that could have gone wrong did. And none of what I'm about to say is an excuse for the poor performance, but they did miss in the transfer portal on guys like Zach York and Trent Caraway and Braden Simpson. There's no question about that. Whether that was an evaluation issue, whether that was a player issue, remains to be seen. I'm sure Jay and the staff have already done their homework on that. LSU was not healthy. Chris Stanfield broke a hand. Curiel broke an ankle in fall ball. Cooper Moore, was lost after his third start. William Schmidt couldn't make his start in the SEC tournament against Auburn. On and on and on down the line. And then I also think they just had some bad baseball fortune. That Saturday Oklahoma game, the Friday Mississippi State game where Milam missed the bag and they were an out away. The very first SEC game when Gavin Guidry gave up the walk-off to Vanderbilt after they had worked so hard to come from behind and take the lead. I just think it was one of those things where, as much good fortune as LSU may have had in 2025, and don't get me wrong, you make your own luck. I'm not sitting here telling you the 25 team was unlucky, the 25 team was lucky, the 26 team was unlucky. But think back to, obviously like the Arkansas game in the World Series and, Cade Anderson's shutout of Coastal Carolina where you win a game 1-0, right? You walked a little bit of a tightrope and you came out ahead in those games. And don't get me wrong, Ethan Fry and Luis Hernandez had big moments to rally you against Little Rock. And and same thing against Arkansas, right? And Arkansas melted down a little bit, right? Where, Vahivo Lloyd didn't throw the ball, didn't turn a double play and threw the ball to third base. And then the next batter, Luis Hernandez hits that rocket and it goes off the left fielder and LSU ties the game and eventually wins. I'm just saying, I think that everything that sort of could have gone wrong for LSU this year did. I think there were 3 or 4, maybe even 5 close games that they really left on the table. And had they won those games, they probably would have found themselves as a 3 seed somewhere. And this weekend would have been a little bit more fun. So that's sort of my take on the baseball. I will probably be on the radio with Coach Bruce Thornton on WRBE later in the week. I'll put this out on all my socials. Either on Wednesday or Friday, we'll have a more in-depth conversation and a super regional preview when I go on the radio with Coach Bruce. I did want to close with LSU's football recruiting weekend and my thoughts on Coach O. So for anybody who doesn't know, the number one player in the country, Jalen Brewster, a defensive lineman who's a Texas Tech commit, and he'll probably stay with Texas Tech, was on campus. Easton Royal, the five-star receiver from Brother Martin, who's committed to Texas, but I believe will at some point flip to LSU, was on campus. Another receiver, Caden Sabb, four or five-star defensive lineman, depending on your recruiting service, Abraham Cisse from Pennsylvania, Makai Williams, a safety who's now decommitted from Florida State, and I believe LSU's in the league for a handful of recruits, big-time recruiting weekend. And if you were all over social media, all you saw was Coach O. Coach O in the tunnel with the players and their families and their representatives giving a speech like they were about to run out and touch the wind bar and go out in front of 102,000 fans. Coach O in front of Mike the Tiger's cage with recruits. Coach O locked up in a defensive line drill with Jalen Brewster. And I want to take everybody back. I didn't do this podcast, obviously, in 2016, but anybody who knows me when Coach O was hired in 2016 knows I did not like the process which brought Coach O to be LSU's head coach. And then obviously he coached the greatest college football team of all time in 2019. But the more we get away from that, I think Joe Brady and Dave Aranda and Joe Burrow and Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase and Patrick Queen and whatever, we know the drill. I think they all had so much of a hand in that. Not that Coach O didn't have any hand in it, but I think the further away you get from that, maybe the less and less you want to say that this was driven by Coach O. But one of the things that I always talked about was I just wanted Coach O to be a mascot. I wanted Coach O to be the rah-rah guy. And he was in 2019. Dave Aranda ran the defense, Joe Brady and Steve Ensminger ran the offense. It was when Dave Aranda got a job and Joe Brady got a job and Steve Ensminger retired, Coach O couldn't backfill those positions and do it again. And then Coach O's off the field stuff with his divorce and some ladies and whatnot got a little janky there for a little while, right? And so I think Coach O lost his way, and then LSU was right to fire him when they did. And I give him a lot of credit for being able to come back here. But this job, just being able to come in to recruit and come in to be the rah-rah guy, which quite frankly Lane Kiffin is not. This is the job Coach O was made for. And Coach O is going to help LSU. Now look, LSU was going to sign a top 7-8 recruiting class, whether Coach O's on the staff or not. But particularly to these guys in and around the state of Louisiana, Coach O loves LSU. He loves Louisiana. The passion shines through. He's on all the social media in his LSU polo, in his gear, taking photos with families, saying hi to Mike the Tiger, rallying the troops in the tunnel of Tiger Stadium. If you haven't gone and seen the video, go watch it. It's great. This is quintessential Coach O, and it's what Coach O can do for LSU. He does the things that I think Lane Kiffin maybe isn't so good at. And because Lane Kiffin is so new to LSU, he doesn't quite have the same perspective. Lane Kiffin operates up here. Lane Kiffin operates like this is an NFL team, and him and Billy Glasscock are crunching numbers, and they're talking about roster building and how much you're going to allocate here. And Coach O doesn't have to worry about that anymore. Coach O doesn't have a position to coach. Coach O doesn't have to worry about X's and O's. This is what Coach O is here for, and I'm all for it, and I think you should be too as an LSU fan. I think it's great. We'll probably do another podcast later in the week. I will let everyone know certainly about my radio hit when I know whether it'll be Wednesday or Friday. It'll be 12 Central noon from 12 to 1 on with Coach Bruce on WRBE. Please like and subscribe to the video. Hit the bell for notifications so you know whenever these podcasts drop, because they're not going to be daily right now because we just don't have enough content in and around LSU. But we're certainly going to follow the baseball transfer portal. We're certainly going to continue to follow college baseball. We'll be here for it all As always, be good to one another. Get out, enjoy the sunshine, enjoy the summer. Always boot up, and always, always, always go Tigers.